Good morning. Welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission. We are on the record in docket PC number 44. This is the third in our continuing series of background with respect to distribution system planning. Today, we will hear from two more of our larger utilities in the state with respect to how they currently plan for the distribution grid. And we'll be hearing from the Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative and the Potomac Edison Company. So we welcome them today. We heard from the Exelon Utilities a few weeks back. At this time, I would like to welcome both utilities for their presentation. I'm not sure who is going to be presenting first, but I see Matthew Rosensteel from Potomac Edison is available. Sir, if you're able to turn on your microphone, I will yield the floor to you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is Jeff Prout from Potomac Edison. Actually, the folks from SMECO have asked to go first, and we are happy to accommodate them as long as that meets with your approval.
I'm sorry, Mr. Trout, I lost connection for 1 second there. Are we ready to proceed with the Potomac Edison presentation?
We are ready to proceed, but the folks from SMECO did ask to go first, and so we're happy to accommodate them as long as that's okay with you.
Thank you. It is more than fine with me. Sorry, I lost you for a moment there. So we will begin with SMECO. I have to step out for a moment. I hand the gavel over to Commissioner Richard. I'll be right back.
Morning, Commissioners. Mr. Richards, can you confirm for me this morning that our audio and visual are coming through okay before I get started?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, sir. Again, good morning. SMECO appreciates this opportunity to provide some additional insight into SMECO's system planning process, and we do believe that the educational sessions will prove to be beneficial leading into the pending system planning work group discussions. My name is Herb Riegel. I'm SMECO's Managing Director for the Technical Engineering and System Information at SMECO, and I'll be leading today's presentation on SMECO's behalf. Following SMECO's and Potomac Edison's presentations this morning, I'll be joined by several of my colleagues to answer any questions that the Commission may have. Joining me later this morning will be our Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Engineering and Operations, Roger Schneider, and our Vice President of Distributed Energy and Sustainability, Jeff Shaw. For the benefit of any external stakeholders who may not otherwise be familiar with our cooperative, I felt it best to first start our presentation by having a few slides to describe a little bit more about who SMECO is. From there, we'll cover several important terms that are used throughout our presentation this morning before we actually dive into our system planning process. So system planning is basically a three-step process, starting with system planning data considerations that many times we can just simply refer to as data input. From there, step 2 involves data analysis and evaluation. And finally, the third and final step that we refer to as data output is results in the system planning documents that we use that document and implement the projects that our planning process dictates. SMECO is a nonprofit electric utility that was founded back in 1937, and we're owned by the customer members we serve. Electric cooperatives typically range in size from about 10,000 members to as many as tens of thousands of members. SMECO is considered to be one of the largest utilities in the United States from a cooperative perspective, coming in at 172,000 customer members served. At our core, SMECO's ideology is simple. We want to provide competitively priced, reliable power to the customer members we serve. Franklin Delano Roosevelt founded what was called the Rural Electrification Administration, known as REA, back in 1985, and its purpose was to extend and promote utility infrastructure improvements to rural America. REA eventually transitioned into Rural Utility Service, known as RUS, and continues to be very active in cooperative life present day. RUS is a long-established part of the United States Department of Agriculture, and they continue to develop and maintain a broad list of standards and design guidelines that still form much of the way we function today as a cooperative. The two most important RUS planning bulletins that really relate to what we're talking about today with system planning are Bulletin 1724D, 101A, and 101B that basically describes a process for long-range planning and construction work plan guides. SMECO's service territory basically covers all or parts of 4 counties. We serve all of Charles and St. Mary's County, just about all of Calvert County, and the southernmost portion of Prince George's County. Our service territory is bound by water on 3 sides, and we have numerous water inlets throughout our service territory. SMECO's residential rate class makes up 91% of our customer base, and our service territory is predominantly rural in nature with a variety of suburban areas mixed in. Numerous waterways and forested tree areas are prevalent throughout our service territory, and many areas throughout our service territory are situated along peninsulas with limited ingress and egress access. SMECO does interconnect to and draw power from the neighboring Pepco electric system in Prince George's and Charles counties, and we also have one 5.5 megawatt and one 10.3 megawatt solar farm that interconnects to our SMECO distribution system. Some important terms that you'll hear throughout our presentation this morning are energy, demand, or sometimes interchangeably referred to as capacity, and system losses. Energy is defined as a
quick system check. Am I having problems, or is everyone else, or it looks like several other people are having problems?
Let's, Commissioner Richard, we hear you just fine. So I don't see any other problems on the system right now. Commissioner Linton, are you good?
I'm good.
Okay. Commissioner Richard, you may need to sign off and come back on. Did you hear me? Okay, I will text Commissioner Richard. Mr. Reedville, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Energy is typically defined as the total amount of electricity that's consumed or generated over time. It's expressed generally in kilowatt hours or megawatt hours, and this is one of the common items that customer members will find on their monthly electric bills. When we talk about demand and capacity, typically when we talk about a customer's load, we're referring to it in terms of demand. And when we talk about generation, we're referring to it in terms of capacity, and sometimes these terms are used incorrectly and interchanged with one another. But they basically relate to the average rate at which electricity is consumed or generated in a defined time interval. That time interval can be an instantaneous demand or capacity, and it could also be referred to in terms of maybe a 15-minute or sometimes even a 60-minute demand interval. System losses, they refer to the difference between electricity that's purchased and sold, or it can also be considered as electricity that's delivered versus received. As we look at our electric system, basically there are numerous components make up an electric system. The 3 main components that we're going to focus our presentation on today, or what's highlighted on the screen there, are distribution substations, 15 kV distribution feeders, and the 15 kV and 7.5 kV distribution tap lines. Other parts of the system, just to be aware of from reference purposes, obviously we have electric system facilities external to the SMECO system. They're obviously owned by other utilities, and they may or may not be under the jurisdiction and control of PJM operations. In SMECO's case, we need to also be concerned with our source Pepco interconnection capacity, and we look at our 230 kV and 69 kV transmission system. And finally, we have our 600-volt class end-use customer services. But again, today's presentation is going to focus on the distribution aspects of our system. When we talk about project planning with respect to today's presentation, we'll talk about 15 kV distribution projects and related 15 kV station-related projects. Typically, engineering and right-of-way review will happen prior to construction. The typical run-of-the-mill distribution projects, that engineering and right-of-way review may happen 1 year ahead of construction timelines, whereas the larger station projects typically look at the engineering and right-of-way concerns as much as 3 to maybe even 5 years ahead of construction. It is important to realize that capital improvement work may not always be planned in advance. The electric system is very dynamic, and sometimes things just happen. Two such examples that readily come to mind might be a seemingly healthy substation power transformer, has good reliability, good maintenance records, and for some unbeknownst reason, all of a sudden it just experiences an internal fault, and that substation transformer has to be quickly and immediately replaced and put back into service. One other such example might be a large commercial project that materializes and comes into the service territory, and that large commercial entity may require upgrades to the distribution system that were not previously included within a planned work plan project. Proper planning ensures that the electric system has the built-in operational capacity, the flexibility, and the resiliency to serve the customer member load under varying system conditions. Again, the electric system is very dynamic and needs to have resiliency and be robust enough to basically handle the hottest summer heat wave that we might experience in mid-July and into August. At the same time, it has to have the same capacity and resiliency to withstand the cold, extended polar vortex periods that we've been unfortunately experienced over the past handful of years. We also need to make sure we have flexibility and the system can operate during different storms and have flexibility to switch the services around to provide power to customers. And we also need to be aware of other human-type interventions such as auto accidents or underground cable dig-ins that may impact reliability of the system. We are aware of wildlife, and probably the three largest concerns when it comes to wildlife and their impact on the electric system are things like squirrels, snakes, and large buzzards. And obviously we have trees and vegetation that can also impact our electric system. System planning needs to consider all of those things as we look at the best project needs for the system. When we talk about system planning considerations, it's very important to understand that there are typically multiple concerns that drive a capital improvement project need, and project solutions need to consider all the related concerns. It's very possible that one potential solution will address one particular concern of a given project need, but there may be only one project that is able to address the multiple needs that may be demanded by that project. Capital projects do need to be constructed in a timely manner to meet the future load requirements of the system. We need to make sure that we're enhancing the system reliability for our existing customer members, and it's important to ensure that the project is not built before it is needed. Also, the project needs to avoid project obsolescence prior to realizing the project's useful life. System planning is not always a cut and dry decision, but it's rather an intuitive art form that considers available historical data, present-day operating conditions, and future load forecast considerations in the system planning process. As we start looking into the system planning process, the very first step of that process is basically to collect and assimilate data. We're looking at historical loads on our substations, historical loads on our distribution feeder circuits, looking at forecasted loads not only on a system-wide basis, but also on a local area basis. Not all parts of an electric system have the same type of growth as each other. Some areas may already be built out and established where there's little to no apparent load growth. Other areas may be very active with lots of new development coming in, making that a much larger high-growth target area. We're constantly reviewing things in the field, taking field observations from our line crews and observations we make just as we drive down the street. And it's important that a system planner have an intimate knowledge of how the electric system functions. This system planning knowledge is important to understand how the system is being operated, how the system performs under varying load conditions, how field personnel view the system. We look at historical data and system modeling analysis, and we'll talk a little bit more about our system modeling capabilities in just a few more slides. We look at the potential future growth areas, talk with local and state planning officials to get their intake on where high growth target areas may be focused. Looking at perceived concerns that are reported by our consumer members and our field crews, and we're also looking to address their apparent cause. What options are available to address a perceived concern? What are the financial impacts of a proposed project? And what new technologies are available to help improve the resiliency and reliability of our system? When we talk about system planning and system planning projects in particular, most system planning projects that are identified can fall into one of these 5 main target areas: capacity, facility, operational, power quality, and lastly, new technologies. When we talk about capacity, we're looking at capacity as it relates to present-day system needs and also future capacities with future load growth coming into play. When we talk about facilities, referring to aging, obsolete, or possibly poor performance history with related equipment. Operational project needs are looking at things such as tie lines, system redundancy, and resiliency of the system. Power quality is looking at our end-use customer service as far as it relates to momentary power interruptions, maintaining a stable and reliable voltage profile, and also looking at and being concerned with system losses as they materialize throughout our system. New technologies include, but may not be limited to, things such as distributed energy resources, wind and solar power, electric vehicles, battery energy storage systems, and smart grid technologies. Looking at each of these 5 project considerations in a little more detail, I'll start with capacity. We talk about historical loading, what is our feeder capacity, what is loading on our system looking like, and what are local area impacts looking like as we forecast load growth into the future. Are there specific hot spots of growth within our communities and within our distribution feeder circuits that require special attention? We look at phase balancing and phase imbalance problems throughout our system and work to balance loads amongst our feeders and our stations equally. We'll look at system losses on our system, and we're also concerned about the distributed energy resources and electric vehicle impacts that may happen on a broader scale and also on a local area scale. Facility considerations, we talked about that we're looking at our aging or deteriorating lines and equipment. Once they get close to their expected life, useful life, it's time to start planning for replacement of those types of facilities. We'll keep in mind preventative maintenance activities, and if there's any important critical equipment that has a maintenance history that indicates that it may start to see problems in the future, we'll look to expedite those projects along in our process planning. Vegetation management, sometimes we have areas of right-of-way where lines may have access issues, and those types of areas may require a project to be implemented to basically improve access to our facilities. We look at existing reliability performance. Are there areas of our system that may experience more outages than what are deemed acceptable, and what ways that we may have to implement projects to improve performance on those areas? Are there any areas of our system that are well suited for an overhead to underground conversion process? And are there any protective sectionalizing coordination issues that we may need to consider in our planning documents? When we talk about operational considerations, traditional system planning would just need to look at the seasonal peak summer and winter loading. And if the system planner was able to address all issues and verify that the system operated well during those peak summer and winter periods, good sound engineering analysis and judgment was to accept the fact that the system would perform during all other times of the year under different load conditions. That has changed in recent years with the proliferation of distributed energy resources into our system. As distributed energy becomes more and more prevalent throughout our system, it's important that the system planning engineer now starts to look also at what happens during light load periods on our system. And a few more slides in this presentation, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about what that impacts of distributed energy may have during lighter load periods. We're also careful to make sure that we have system redundancies and flexibility built into our system to handle unexpected interruptions in service for various reasons that we talked about earlier. And we also want to be mindful of critical loads. And when I talk about critical loads in this context, I'm referring to things such as hospitals, police stations, fire stations, and the like. Moving into our power quality considerations, we're concerned about line and transformer. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Just if you could go back just one slide. Sorry to interrupt, but it just sort of jumped out. Why did your winter peak jump so high, I guess, in 2014, 2015?
We had mentioned, Mr. Chairman, earlier about the winter polar vortex periods, and this is actually a very interesting slide. Historically speaking, SMECO's electric system has been a summer peaking system. That had transitioned a number of years ago into what we call a bimodal system, where our system peak demands happen some seasons during the summer periods and other seasons during the winter periods. More predominantly over the past 10 years, our system has changed as weather events have changed and so forth. Our system has become more predominantly a winter peaking system. And we had two events back, I believe it was 2015 and 2018, where we experienced a long extended polar vortex period. And you can see the impact. SMECO is mostly a residential customer base, a lot of electric heat pumps. And we tend to find out that when winter temperatures drop down to single-digit and low teens for extended periods of time, we have a number of heat pumps where electric resistance heat starts to kick in, and that has a profound effect, as you can see in that chart, on our winter peak loads. So historically,
no, thank you. Those double peaks just stand out. And what percentage, if you know, are your members? Do most of them have electric heat pumps in your service territory, or do you overlap somewhat with distribution gas system?
Certainly, it's predominantly electric heat pump systems, but there are pockets of our service territory, Mr. Chairman, where natural gas is available. In those situations, it's primarily natural gas for heating and obviously electric for air conditioning.
Thank you for that explanation.
Absolutely. Let's see here. So we talked about our power quality considerations, and we talked about the line and transformer thermal loading capacities, head end and end of line voltage profiles, protective device interrupting fault duties, and also need to be concerned about reactive power needs of the system. New technology trend considerations that we're always aware of and looking to implement into our system planning protocols and projects include, but may not be limited to, distributed energy resources, primarily solar in this case. To a lesser extent, we do have some wind systems online on our service territory. Battery energy storage systems, impacts of electric vehicle. We're on the front end of the curve for electric vehicle penetration onto the system. As something that we're continuing to monitor and evaluate how that's unfolding within our service territory. We look at distribution automation and real-time operational power flow modeling, such as a distribution management system and distributed energy resource management system capabilities. So we move from the data input phase of our system planning process. Now we're going more into the evaluation and analyzing of the system performance of the system. Most utilities do have software models that are used to simulate how power flows through the system, and to another extent, how short circuit currents affect our system. For purposes of today's discussion, we're going to focus mostly on the power flow aspect of these system models. While system models are a great tool and do provide technical analysis of the system, it's very important to keep in mind that good engineering practices need to also back up the technical software models and use good common sense and good judgment and keep an intuition with eye towards the future. We just don't want to blindly look at what a technical power flow software model shows. We want to make sure that we understand and interpret that data in a correct way. This is an interesting slide, and Mr. Chairman, it kind of goes back to a little bit what you talked about earlier with our winter peaks. So we talk about electric system being very dynamic, and loads on the system change season by season, month to month, day by day, and hour by hour. So if we look and ask ourselves, what happens to our electric system load, and how does the system function during all of the 8,760 hours in any given calendar year? What we'll find out is these loads during each of those hours basically can fall into one of four different load buckets. Starting on the left-hand side of the chart, we have a load bucket we call our light load. And this basically represents when system load is less than 40% of the given system peak demand for that given year. This is periods that we typically see during the early morning hours when most folks are fast asleep in their beds, and the businesses are closed down, haven't opened up yet, or they may also occur during lighter springtime or fall periods when the heating and cooling degree days are near zero. This is what we call our light load period. Moving into the second bar, what we'll call our typical load period. This represents loads that are between 40 and 60% of the peak demand loading for the given year. And this is your typical average run-of-the-mill day. Businesses are open during daytime waking hours. People are out and about doing their normal business. Weather is comfortable, not too cold, not too hot, none of the extremes. This is our typical load period. If we take these two curves, or two load buckets, light load and typical load, we find out that the number of hours in any given year, 85% of those hours fall into one of those two load buckets. And that's important because it basically tells us that our electric system demands are less than 60% of our peak demand that we experience in any given calendar year for quite a large portion of the year on our system. As we start to move into our summer or winter load periods, we have a load block that we term our shoulder load period. This represents loads that are between 60 and 80% of our peak demand values, and that's, coming into July and August, we get some warm 80-degree days, or maybe in wintertime we're down into the 30s. Temperatures are not at their extremes. This is what we call a shoulder load period, and you can see it's a much lesser number of hours that we experience in those load buckets. Finally, the small bar that we see at the right-hand side of the graph is our peak demand load bucket. This is when our system peak demands are at the absolute highest that we experience in a given year. In Smecco's case, they have started to occur during winter hours more so than summer hours. They represent less than 2% of the total hours of our system. And the main takeaway from this slide is that system planning and the electric system needs to be designed so that it's robust and has the capacity needed to serve those peak demand periods, even though they only last a short period of time. And it has to have a fiscally responsible balance with proposed projects to make sure that loads can be served and there's redundancy and resiliency to serve loads during the 85% of the hours that are our typical and lighter load periods of time. That's an important slide.
Mr. Riegel, can I ask you a question about the slide?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Commissioner Linton.
So I want to make sure I understand the terminology shoulder load. My understanding of shoulder load is a lesser draw on peak demand. In other words, a lesser value as compared to peak demand. It's in the spring or fall, considered shoulder months. But this slide seems to indicate that it's 60 to 80% of peak demand, which is it seems the opposite of my concept of what shoulder load or shoulder months are. Can you help me understand that?
Absolutely, Commissioner O'Donnell. I'll sure do my best. So in terms of this slide and in terms of this presentation this morning, when we talk about shoulder load, we're not talking about the spring and fall time period. So those are what might be confirmed as a shoulder month as opposed to a shoulder load. So the shoulder load is basically the summer or the winter periods that aren't at the extremes, but they are leading up into the higher peak demand values. So that's the main difference. It's not a shoulder month, it's a shoulder load.
Okay, that was my confusion. Was I had in my mind shoulder month, and here shoulder is used to describe something almost the opposite of that. So,
Very good. Thank you for the opportunity to clear that up. All right, when we look at the utility power flow software models, and again, most utilities have different flavors or different variations of power flow software models, but they all basically serve the same purpose. That's to simulate and create a model of what your electric distribution system is doing and how power flow flows through the circuits. In this particular example, I have our Bolton substation pulled up. This substation shows 4 different feeder circuits colored by the different color loads. And what we can do with this is we can actually simulate power flows for any different time of the year, be it the light load periods or summer or winter peak demand periods, and we can get an analysis as to how power is flowing through the system. A couple of slides here to show what the output of these types of reports and system analysis look like. One set of analysis for this substation will provide power flow results similar to what you see on the screen. shows us percent loadings of not only our individual feeder circuits, but also the specific local line sections associated with each of those feeder circuits. It shows us what our demand is on those circuits, if we have any current imbalance or voltage imbalance on the circuit, what the connected customer load is on each of these circuits, if there's any areas of the circuit that are experiencing higher than normal line losses, that might be an area of the target for a system upgrade. And more importantly, in recent years, is it actually gives us a way to categorize and keep tabs on what's happening with distributed energy resources. So on the right side of the screen, you'll see a tab up here that shows generation capabilities. We can basically overlay rooftop solar or solar farm interconnected distributed customer generation on top of our load model and see what the impacts of that generation is on our load for various load points throughout the year. If we take it and look at it in a graphical form, for our Bolton substation, I'm looking at a 24-hour day during our peak January period. And what we can see here is the top curve in blue represents our typical SMECO load for Bolton substation. We can see that the peak demand is just over 20 megawatts, and you'll see two humps. One occurs in the morning hours, typically around 7 a.m. for SMECO system. This is when people start waking up, they're taking showers, they're cooking breakfast, getting children ready for school, businesses are starting to show up, and we start to see a peak occur in those early morning hours. Similarly, on SMECO system, we'll see another slightly smaller peak in the evening hours as people return home from work, cook dinner, take some showers, entertain themselves around the house and so forth. And that's what our load curve might look like on one of our typical substations. Down the bottom of this curve in the lighter blue, we'll see what the impact is of distributed energy, in this case, rooftop solar for this circuit. And as you might expect, during the nighttime hours, the solar capacity is zero. You know, sun doesn't shine, the solar panels aren't providing us with any capacity resource. And as the sun comes up in the morning through midday, you can see that the solar curve has a peak impact in the middle of the day. If we overlay the solar generation curve with the SMECO load curve, you kind of get the curve in the middle that's shown in green, and it basically shows how the solar capacity affects the load for that particular substation. So now this is a representative example of what it looks like during a January month, and I'll flip here to my next slide, and this basically moves on to what this same station might look like during a lighter load period in the month of April. So we see the same thing. We still see two humps, one in the morning and one in the evening hours, but we'll see that the system peak load on this station has dropped from 20 megawatts in third to almost 7 to 7.5 megawatts of load. We'll also see, because we're looking in the April months, that the amount of solar generation capacity is a little bit higher than what it was back in January, and extends for a little bit longer because the daylight hours are getting a little bit longer as well. And if we overlay those two curves on top of one another, again, you can see what the resultant load shape is for this circuit. So we talked about how system planners need to be aware of what's happening during lighter load periods, as opposed to traditional planning of the past that only looked at the system peak values. As solar penetration on this particular circuit would start to increase, we would see that there is a potential during daytime hours that the resultant load on the system will come closer and closer to a net zero value. And at those time periods, we need to be concerned and make sure that we have proper voltage regulations, that we don't have any power quality type interactions to be concerned with as a system planner. So these models are quite helpful.
Yes, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask you another question?
Absolutely.
This morning, I just did a quick review of our annual report to the General Assembly regarding net metering, and there was some reporting in there that indicated there's some wind resource, maybe de minimis, but some wind resource in the SMECO service territory. Where are the wind resource? What kind of wind resource exists in the service territory?
Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell, that is correct. So this slide here is representative of our Bolton substation only. There are no interconnected wind systems on Bolton substation. We do have a handful of smaller customer wind systems on other stations throughout our service territory. but predominantly solar is the main interconnected resource here.
Okay, so they're not industrial scale. They're customer owned system.
That is correct. And actually, you can see the bottom of this slide, Commissioner O'Donnell. If you see the legend down there, there is a category for both battery energy storage and wind, so that if we did have that on this system, it would start to show up just like the solar curve does.
Okay. That's what elicited my question. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. So as we wrap up our evaluation and analysis of our system planning process, now we're moving into the third and final phase, which is what are the data outputs? What documents are going to memorialize our system planning projects and explain what these projects are? In SMECO's case, we have 4 core documents that work together to successfully implement our planned capital improvement projects. They're referred to as our load forecast, our plant improvement plan that is sometimes termed as a long-range plan, a financial forecast, and our construction work plan that can basically be thought of as a short-term plan. And on any given year, the short-term construction work plan projects are always reviewed as part of an annual budget review process. So if we look at these 4 documents and exactly what they contain and how they relate to one another, it's important to understand that they all feed into one another. The load forecast is basically something that's updated on an annual basis and covers a 20-year load forecast period. It is based on statistics provided by the Maryland State Office of Planning. And an example of what some of those planning statistics might be is they include information such as population data, household size, labor statistics, average cost of electricity, information on consumer price index, heating and cooling degree days, income-related energy statistics. So it has a whole lot of things that work into the model along with our historical loading and so forth to basically come up with a forecast of what customer member accounts, energy sales, and summer and winter seasonal peak demands may look like going forward. This information feeds into what we call our plant improvement plan or the long-range plan. In SMECO's case, this plan typically spans between 10 and 12 years, and it's providing the roadmap for the general system long-term development needs, considers all the historic system loads, outage trends, future load forecast information, and it works to basically determine how the system may need to expand in future years to accommodate growth in a cost-effective and reliable manner. Information from those 2 documents feeds into our third document here known as our financial forecast. The financial forecast provides a balance between the rates and electric system reliability. We need to ensure that the annual revenue exists within our system to operate and maintain and expand the system as required. So if the plant improvement plan says we need so many dollars to basically implement these proposed projects, we're going to look at the financial forecast to make sure that those projects can be implemented in a financially responsible manner. After these 3 documents, we come into our short-term planning document that is known as construction work plan as it relates to cooperative type utilities. And this is basically where the projects start to enter into the implementation and construction phase. This provides the electric system performance analysis that is needed to result in the short-term capital improvement projects that are looking to address our immediate system needs. It looks at more detailed immediate system needs that also fit within the long-term vision of the plant improvement plan. And it's important to note that all of these projects are reviewed during the annual budget review process. And we'll look at what the budget looks like for a given calendar year and how system growth has promulgated locally within our system, and make sure that the projects are on track if they're ready to go on the current year, if they need to be accelerated or maybe pushed back based on recent events that have happened. We basically just use the budget process as a good sanity check and to make sure that everything meshes well for what's being implemented in a given year. So this is basically the conclusion of SMECO's presentation this morning. It did hopefully provide a high-level look into what our system planning process is. On behalf of SMECO, I would again thank the Commission for allowing us the opportunity to speak this morning. We do look forward to participating in the upcoming work group sessions, and we certainly will be available following our colleague Potomac Edison's presentation to answer any additional questions that the Commission may have. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and we will be available after the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riegel. That was a very comprehensive presentation. As one of the country's largest cooperatives, I am not surprised that SMECO has these policies underway for their planning procedures. If any commissioners have a desire to ask questions now of SMECO, we can. Otherwise, we could hold them until after we hear from Potomac Edison. So let me see if my colleagues have any questions. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Riegel, I wanted to ask you a hypothetical. Say an energy company, third party, has a development in mind where they want to come in with an industrial scale battery storage system in the vicinity of one of your substations that transitions your transmission system to your distribution system and tie in that industrial scale battery storage system into the high side or the 230 kV side of your transmission system. How does that work? How does SMECO deal with such a proposal from a third party provider? What are the big high level steps you have to go through to consider such a thing?
Absolutely. So the first thing to keep in mind, Commissioner O'Donnell, is there is a distinction between what we call transmission level interconnections and distribution level interconnections. So if it is, in your scenario here, if they wanted to interconnect to the 230 kV transmission system, that actually would be propagated and the interconnection application would go through PJM. And PJM would accept the interconnection application and reach out directly with the utility, in this case SMECO, basically meet with the customer and go through the study process to figure out how that proposed project can be safely interconnected to the grid. If on the other hand, it was connected to our 15 kV distribution system, they would basically enter into SMECO's what we call online web-based software called PowerClerk, which is available to accept interconnection applications to our system. And very similar to the PJM project, process, SMECO would host what we call a scoping meeting to define what the project's intent is and answer any questions that both the developer or the utility may have, and then basically enter into the three-step system planning process, which is the feasibility study, a system impact study, and a facility study to make sure that the project could be safely and reliably interconnected into the system. Once that studies conclude that can be achieved and the developer wishes to move forward, we would move into setting up an interconnection agreement and proceeding accordingly.
And assuming the project is realized, cost recovery on the high side or the transmission side would be through tariffs filed with FERC, I would imagine, or somehow there's cost recovery that goes through FERC. But if it's on the distribution side, how does such a project, an industrial scale battery storage system, recover costs? How is that occurring?
So typically, Commissioner O'Donnell, the interconnecting customer would be responsible for any upgrades or interconnection costs associated with that project.
But how are the energy costs recovered?
The energy costs, again, aside from a net metering tariff where you had small scale rooftop solar participating through the net metering tariff, if a customer such as you proposed were to interconnect to utility, they would either be looking to do one of two things, either one through PURPA, sell power to the utility through either a purchase power agreement at a defined rate as indicated via PURPA, or they would be selling into the open PJM marketplace, in which case they would have to have their own contracts and off-takers for that energy.
Okay, thank you. I think there are projects on the minds of third-party developers that are coming down the pipeline. I think we're going to see more of that increasing, not less.
Yes, I would agree with that assumption, absolutely.
Thank you.
And Mr. Regal, I did note that under the heading of new technologies, you mentioned electric vehicles. I know both Potomac Edison and SMECO have a public EV charging program. And just for a plug for tomorrow's event, we have our mid-course evaluation during our 5-year pilot program. So we're at the 2.5-year mark tomorrow. So we'll look forward to hearing from both SMECO and Potomac Edison at that presentation.
We have come a long way.
You have, indeed, and I visited some of the charging equipment down in Southern Maryland as well. We'll next turn to our utility on the opposite side of the state in the Panhandle from Potomac Edison. Mr. Trout, are you and your team now ready to present?
We are, Commissioner, or excuse me, Mr. Chairman. First of all, my name is Jeff Trout. I'm counsel to Potomac Edison. And we will have two primary presenters today. Stephen Mclucas is the manager of electric services for Potomac Edison and engineering services, excuse me. I apologize in advance. I am ill and here nonetheless. And then he will speak primarily about current process at Potomac Edison, and then looking more to the future, because you have been asking about that in these meetings and developments that are occurring now and in the future. We have Michelle Summerday, who's one of the leaders of First Energy's Emerging Technologies Group. She will be presenting several of the slides. And with your indulgence at the very end, assuming I'm still capable of speaking, I would present one slide with some questions that have come up in the course of the prior presentations, and that I just wanted to sort of bookmark for possible future consideration by the work group once the work group is launched. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mr. Mclucas, and he will start walking you through our processes. You're on mute, Steve.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Jeff. My name is Steve Mclucas. I'm engineering manager services, engineering services for Potomac Edison. I've had 47 years with the company, and most of which has been in the planning, engineering, and operational management parts of the business. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you what our current process is. And as Jeff said, we will talk about how that is evolving and moving towards the future. So, next slide. This is our agenda, very high level of what we're going to talk about. Just give you an overview of Potomac Edison, specific design considerations, analysis and forecasting, much of which is going to be very similar to what you just heard. Sources and outcomes, electric distribution investment surcharge, one of our surcharges that we have towards trying to improve our system for the future. And then talk about ad hoc analysis, our forward look, and FERC 2222, and then turn it back over to Jeff. So next. This is just a very high level overview of Potomac Edison and some statistics for you to look at. We serve from Washington County west in Maryland, all of the counties. And then we also serve Frederick County and Montgomery County, part of Montgomery County, and parts of Carroll and Howard County to the east. Our largest growth areas are to the east, where the Baltimore and DC influence is shown in our overall growth. We've generally had very high growth histories to the east. One thing to recognize with us, though, is we only serve 2 major towns in our service territory in complete fashion. Frederick and Cumberland, we serve all of those 2 cities. However, there are three towns in our territory that have their own municipalities and so on. That's Hagerstown, Williamsport, and Thurmont. So one key thing on our statistics on the slides is our customers per mile. If you look at the density as we go farther west, the density certainly is dropping because our territory is, once you get past Frederick County, becomes more and more rural, much more mountainous. Terrain is very challenging, and obviously the customer base in those areas are very widespread. Also to point out gas, because the question was asked there earlier, gas proliferation in our territory is primarily to the east. As you go farther west, we have less and less gas, and therefore Potomac Edison in total and in general is a winter peaking company. Now, we certainly have areas in our territory where summer peak situations are prevalent to us, mostly in the east. But from a historical basis, our primary peak loads are during the winter time. So, next slide. All right, from a just general conversation perspective, this shows a little bit about what I was just talking about. The green areas show the forested and mountainous territories in the east, and much of that territory is in the Potomac Edison territory. We do our vegetation control and maintenance on a 4-year cycle. And although we certainly remove the overhang in our subtransmission and distribution areas, the steep grades that we have in our territory certainly makes it difficult and often prevalent that trees from well off our right of way fall and sometimes make contact with our facilities because of the terrain that we're serving. So much of our system is heavily radial lines, especially to the west. Farther west we go, the more that statement is true. We don't have as many opportunities to network our systems. We're certainly looking and evaluating opportunities, and we'll talk about that a little bit in our slide later on our EDIS program. We also
Mr.
have the
Mclucas, Mr. Mclucas, could you speak up a little bit? I'm having a bit of a hard time hearing you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'll try.
Thank you.
We also have the Continental Divide that causes different weather patterns in different parts of our territory. As many of you are probably aware, out west in the westernmost territory, that area is known for ice and snow historically. But we have been seeing, as you can see in the chart up at the top of the slide there, that the damaging storms are certainly have shown an increase as we go through the years, and certainly the weather patterns are changing. The other thing to point out is because of the low density of our area, we do not have AMI data at all of our substations and locations. And consequently, we get our data from areas where we have SCADA and other AMI data available to us, but we also significantly take a lot of time and effort to accumulate the data from our substations and our circuits that we have so that we can do proper planning in our system. Next slide. All right, so our general planning process, we obtain and verify the readings on our circuits and substation transformers. We create a load forecast for a 5-year planning horizon. And then we perform in-depth computer analysis for 20% of our circuits every year on a regular basis. That's our normal planning process. And we'll talk about the exceptions. It obviously has to happen because things change as time goes on. Customers and load growth might change, and we see things happen that maybe weren't evaluated. And we'll talk about those things in a little bit. But we do take summer and winter substation transformer and circuit loadings. We do the 5-year forecast as I talked about. We evaluate any additional loads in addition to normal load forecast that we may be aware of, and put that into our forecast, both from a customer perspective and from a distributed energy resource perspective as well. That all goes into our forecast. Then we perform a current year analysis that our computer systems, much as what Smecco discussed, evaluates our circuits on a capacity, voltage, and one thing that wasn't mentioned was we also evaluate that our protective schemes in our circuits every 5 years at least, to make sure that we've captured any changes, that our protection schemes are adequate to serve the customers and provide safe and reliable service to our customers. We do a 5-year forecast, as I said, and then we also do an analysis of all of those circuits on the same basis on a 5-year out basis. We want to see what's coming. We want to know the best of our ability based upon the inputs that we get from discussions with customers, economic development, prospective customers coming through the planning prospect with the counties and cities, and take a look at it 5 years out, because sometimes the solutions that we come up with from a planning perspective cannot just be completed in a year's basis. Most of our distribution plans generally can, but often that might require a new substation, and that could take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to get it through the process. So we're looking 5 years out as well as current year to identify any deficiencies that might show up from a engineering guidelines perspective, internal to First Energy, Potomac Edison, and also meeting all of the Public Service Commission requirements that are out there from a reliability basis and serving the customer basis. So we do do the action, we recognize the improvements that might be necessary over that 5-year period. We do that on a priority basis from a cost benefit perspective. There are often small things that we can do that might correct some problems. And then, as I say, the worst cases could require new substations, new lines to be built. We've also entered into some other types of like distribution automation that might take some longer times to get those in place because of our general area and the type of facilities we have out there. Next slide.
Lucas, if I could
Yes.
ask you a question.
Sure.
Obviously, a lot of this analysis and the planning and the forecasting is done at the utility level. But you are just one of many utilities in the First Energy company. Can you just give me a ballpark of what percentage of some of these activities are rolled up to the parent company and what is done on an individual basis in Williamsport?
We do everything that I'm talking about at Williamsport or in Potomac Edison. Potomac Edison, we're responsible for our own distribution planning responsibilities. When we get to the sub-transmission and transmission levels, those are done more corporately by our transmission planning groups that are located elsewhere in First Energy. But everything that we're talking about from a distribution perspective right now is done here at Potomac Edison by people that work in my organization.
Thank you. That is good to know. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, and as we talked about, in order to have the best load forecast that we have out there, we have to know what's coming down the pipeline. We do that in a number of different ways. Our field designers are out talking to developers, finding out what they have in their vision, not only just what they're working on today, but what's coming down the road. We do have conversations with economic development throughout our territory. We have customer account groups that stay in contacts with various developers and so on so we're staying in tune with what is being planned and talked about happening in our territory. We also participate in a few of our jurisdictions of site plan reviews, primarily in our growth areas, so that we can see what's being talked about and have advance notice of things that are going on. Another part of our planning goes around the reliability needs. We have various programs that are driven by the guidelines within Potomac Edison and First Energy. We look at how many times our customers are interrupted. That's what the SEMI program is, overall reliability metrics, and how we're performing in relation to those requirements. We have large outage reviews on a weekly basis. Every week we have a meeting of any outage that occurred in the past week of over 100 customers, and we evaluate how we performed in that aspect. First of all, what caused the outage? Is there anything that could have been done that might have kept it from happening? And once the outage did occur, how did we perform in getting the customers back in service? And that's a weekly discussion that we do that has really brought on some good benefits to our customers, because we recognize on a very short-term basis lessons learned and opportunities that we could do things a little differently that might help the system in general. And then we also, my reliability group, we also certainly look at the COMAR requirements and RM43 requirements, and have those activities in general maintenance type activities. All of those are listed in the blue area down there, as well as such things as our worst performing circuits and worst performing devices, where we will look and see if we can create action plans that help improve those situations on areas that are having ongoing problems. So, next slide. All right, this slide is our electric distribution investment surcharge requirements at EDIS. It's something that we put into place and is operational through next year under its current approval. In that program, we replace about 51 miles of underground a year because of the concentric neutral from back in the 70s when Maryland started putting new services and new extensions underground. That underground was bare concentric neutral back in the time, and it's reaching times when much of it is reaching the end of its length. So we're proactively trying to identify the priorities of replacing that cable from a customer satisfaction perspective, and we've done very well in that regard, I believe. Substation recloser replacements. Historically, we had what was called hydraulic reclosers. That in today's world, new technology exists that allows us, the old reclosers typically in our substations would, if there was a fault on the line, all three phases of the circuit was interrupted. Well, the new technologies that's come out with these types of devices will only interrupt one phase if there's only one phase of the circuit in trouble. And so we have a proactive program to start replacing the hydraulic reclosers with the new single pole tripping devices that are out there. We certainly prioritize that based upon reliability metrics on the different circuits and so on, so that we're positively affecting the areas that can benefit from those types of things. And then I talked about distribution automation schemes. This is a generally new technology for us. We've been doing it for 4 or 5 years now, I believe. And what it does, we do work to tie circuits together, and then we put automated schemes out on the line that if there is a fault, if there is a problem on the line, the reclosers that are on the line will function together, recognizing where the problem is, and will automatically, without human intervention, energize the other parts of the circuit that ordinarily in the past the whole circuit might have been interrupted. But through this technology that we're using, it closes in the tie area and re-energizes the other parts of the circuit where possible that wasn't affected by the faulted area. So we're automatically, without human intervention or having to wait for our linemen to get out there to identify where the problem is, we're minimizing the number of customers through these activities that might be affected by an outage. So all of these things have certainly brought great benefit to our customers. Certainly has been very successful since we put it into operation with the surcharge. And as I said, that's in place through next year, and certainly you may be hearing from us on that program.
Mr. Mclucas,
Yes, sir.
cover with me just a little bit about why these upgrades aren't built into your normal rate case kind of forecasting and are covered with a surcharge. What was the thinking about that? I know Potomac Edison until recently hadn't been in for a rate case for maybe a couple decades. Why do we need a surcharge instead of the normal forecasting and planning process that would be involved in a rate case?
Well, I believe from our perspective, and Jeff, you can jump in at any point, but from our perspective, we wanted to get started on these things on a very proactive basis that gave us, from a budgetary perspective, gave us the ability to do more than what we might ordinarily be able to do on a rate case basis. We've been very proactive to get the benefits out of all of these things, and the surcharge allowed us to do that from a budgetary perspective quicker than we may have been able to do otherwise. So, Jeff, any?
Mr. Trout, you got any historical perspective for me to help me think about next year?
Well, yes, Commissioner. And I think Steve summarized it very well. When we came in for our rate case at the end of 2018, and you sat on the panel that heard our case in early 2019, we explained then that these were incremental and proactive programs. The three here are the three of the four we proposed that the commission did approve. And the plan, as you may recall, is to integrate the work that has been done on these three programs into our next rate filing, which you directed us to make no later than March of 2023, which, by the way, would line up very nicely, lets us use 2022, the last year of these programs, as our test year. And so that'll optimize our integrating the programs as they've been operated to date into the rate case. And then in that new rate case, we will consider in 2023 what incremental programs that would be subject to a surcharge would be appropriate at that time. So it's a step-by-step process where that was the first step. We are executing the first step now, and we will all be before you early in 2023 to discuss what form a second step, whether a second step is appropriate, and what form it will take.
Thank you for that. And remind me, how do these projects that are covered by the surcharge move into rate base? I mean, it has to be through a rate case. It has to be.
Yes.
Okay.
So right now, as you know, the costs are being recovered, or the O&M is being recovered through the surcharge, and I believe that the capital is being accumulated through a reg asset, and I wish I had Mr. Valdez here to double check that what I'm saying is correct. But the capital will be in the rate base that is proposed in our next rate case. Anything that we've spent in capital from 2019 when you approve these programs through 2023 when we come before you, well, through the end of 2022, since our plan is to use calendar year 2022 as our test year. That'll all be reflected in rate base at that time. And so it'll all of that will get it for, using air quotes, normalized at that point. And the issue, or an issue, in 2023 for the commission to consider will be what would be additional, what, if anything, will be in a surcharge program going forward at that point, as opposed to part of our normal operations and our normal rate recovery.
All right, thank you for that. Are there any limitations, like our STRIDE program for our gas utilities, strategic infrastructure replacement program, has limitations, statutory limitations on customer impacts? Are there any statutory limitations? Did we place any statutory, or did we place any limitations in our order, not statutory, but on the EDIS?
There are no limitations of the kind that you find with respect to STRIDE, but you did put a clear framework around the EDIS program when you approved it, Commissioner. And one of the frames is that we report to you every year. The next report will be coming in at the end of November on what we did and how much it costs each year. And then we supplement that information in February. The commission approved the programs within a budget range. And so to date, there have been no issues with any of the information that we've reported to the commission. I will note, just, this is a little bit off point, but since we're talking about how things work now and how they will transition to the future, it may be a good foreshadowing. So the EDIS has been approved by, these programs have been approved by the commission through the end of 2022. And that's why we're coming in for our rate case in early 2023. First of all, you said come in within 4 years, and that's within 4 years. And secondly, because that lets us line up the end of the test year with the end of these 3 programs. So the numbers all fit together very nicely. It all meshed very, very well. But that does raise the question of while our 2023 rate case is pending, should we continue any or all of these programs? And just spoiler alert, we will be coming to you early next year with thoughts about whether the programs should continue in their current form during the pendency of the rate case that's going to get filed in early 2023. Just so that to the extent it's appropriate, for the programs to continue during that, it's called a gap period between the end of the current authorization and the commission's order on our next rate case, to the extent it's appropriate to continue some or all of these 3 programs in their current form during that gap period, the commission will be given, through a filing by us, plenty of time to consider whether and how that should occur.
All right, fair enough, Mr. Trout. I appreciate it. I would say, notwithstanding the fact that we ordered the utility to come back in for a rate case within 4 years, the EDIS seems to weigh on the side of the ledger that indicates it would behoove the utility to come back in and get some of this capital moved into rate base. So I appreciate your response there, and that it will help me hopefully next year.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much for the questions. Hopefully we've answered them completely for you. Next slide. All right, so from a ad hoc perspective, what I've described to you is what our normal process is on a regular basis. The engineers that we have geographic areas they're responsible for and responsibility and ownership for performing those activities. But as I said before, there are always things that happen that we couldn't foresee. Planning schedules change, developers change what their plans are. Certainly the distributed energy resources, we've been very active in the activities around requests by customers and companies in that arena. And so in order to take into effect the changes that maybe we just couldn't recognize on our 5-year planning basis, we certainly have a process in place where through the feedbacks that we get in the various aspects that I talked about through our contacts with the customers, through our activities with economic development, contacts with the local government agencies and developers. We have to be able to react to things that we just didn't foresee or have come about because it changes in plans by the customers. And that certainly is on an ongoing basis. Once we identify something has changed, those same engineers will rerun the analysis that they do on that normal 5-year basis. They'll change the forecast. They'll look at the opportunities and the challenges that those changes put on our system, to recognize if there's any deficiencies, any activities that we need to take in order to adequately serve the customers that we just found out about, or whose timetables have changed or whatever. And we will certainly recognize any improvements that need to be done so that when that customer hooks up to our system, or that new energy resource hooks up to our system, that the system is prepared to serve that new load or new energy resource without negatively impacting the rest of our customers, and keeping our system operating safely and reliably to as we want it to. So next slide. All right, and with this, I'm going to turn this over to Michelle Summerday, who, as Jeff introduced her, is part of our Emerging Technologies group, and she'll cover much of what's going on for the future. So, Michelle, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. And good morning, commissioners. My name is Michelle Summerday, and I am a policy advisor in First Energy's Emerging Technology Strategy Group. And I also co-lead our FERC Order 2222 strategy effort within the company. So I appreciate the opportunity to share FE's vision related to emerging technologies and FERC Order 2222. So at First Energy, our vision is to successfully serve our customers now and to prepare our company to serve our customers in the future as their needs evolve. So much of our ability to do that, to become agile and evolve, will be to strengthen our infrastructure. And we have developed an emerging technologies roadmap that's centered around distribution grid of the future, electrification, smart cities, and alternative generation. And you'll see those areas on the slide in the gray box. And we have defined vision statements for each of those areas as we aspire to achieve them. So for example, with distribution grid of the future, meeting those evolving needs and changing expectations of our consumers and their adoptions of new technologies is going to require a modern electric grid that is more intelligent, flexible, and secure. So it's our vision to have a distribution platform employing technologies that delivers customer value through a stronger, more empowering energy experience. Mapping out the technologies to promote real-time operations that could provide visibility and control of devices on the system will enable a more dynamic grid, improve reliability, and improve service to our customers. So investing in things like advanced distribution automation systems and piloting energy storage are just a few examples of those technologies that will build our future. I think Steve highlighted a few others like distributed automation and such. So additionally, advanced metering infrastructure is continually evaluated within our footprint. As the adoption of DER and wholesale market increases, the need for bidirectional metering will be necessary. We do support AMI and are rolling it out in several of our other states, but a plan for AMI in Maryland has not yet been determined. Now, other areas like emerging electrification of transportation, smart cities initiatives, and the rise of alternative energy and energy markets is fast approaching. So we are moving towards a strategy to have a reliable, economy-wide electrification effort to reduce our carbon emissions and power a more sustainable future. So beginning this year, we have 100% of our new purchases of our light duty and aerial bucket or fleet trucks will be electric or hybrid vehicles. And that's going to create a path to a 30% fleet electrification by 2030. We also have our EV program in Maryland, and we have a proposed pilot program in New Jersey. And as you know, both install, own, and operate chargers for light duty electric vehicles. In Maryland, we also have the customer rebates and the off-peak rewards programs. But keep in mind that with widespread electrification comes growth opportunity, but also exponential increases on our system. So we'll need to be prepared to manage the grid in a reliable and safe manner. Times are changing, and so are changing circumstances of electricity consumption. For example, more of our customers are working from home now. There's more renewable generation being added to the system, and it makes grid modernization more important than ever. And we support our customers' growing preference for DERs, but we need to just ensure that those interconnections don't compromise the safety and the reliability of our system. And given the increase in DERs on the distribution system, I'd like to also just provide a little background on the FERC Order 2222, if I may. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the intent of the order is to allow DER participation in the wholesale markets through an aggregator. Now, currently, resources that are 100 kW and above, they can already do that. But this order is really focused on those smaller distributed energy resources that currently cannot participate. So it will give them another potential revenue stream. And when we refer to DER, we're talking about distributed energy resources that are located on the distribution system or behind the customer meter. So it may include solar or energy storage like batteries, distributed generation, demand response, and even electric vehicles and EV chargers. So the DER definition under the FERC order has expanded. Now, in each of our service territories, we're already seeing an increase in DER penetration. But once the FERC order becomes effective, we project those numbers will increase. So we ask ourselves, what makes this different than traditional generators? Is when a DERA is called upon to meet a performance obligation to PJM, it's going to use resources that are now connected to the distribution system to meet its needs. And this new process has the potential to substantially alter the EDC's daily operations, including areas like what Steve had described: system planning and operations, retail metering, billing functions, and wholesale settlements. So this market function will impact the distribution system, and PJM must recognize these differences when implementing Order 2222. We've spent a lot of time over the last several months educating and communicating and collaborating with PJM on how the system works. So additionally, now the order requires that the RTOs, PJM in our case, to file tariff modifications that will consider things like aggregation size, vocational requirements, metering and telemetry, and participation models. So the FERC does acknowledge that the state or the local entities will govern the distribution level interconnections for DERs participating in the wholesale markets exclusively through an aggregation. But we have been, spending a lot of time with them to ensure that that line is in the sand is not crossed. And again, we're stressing the need to be mindful of retail jurisdiction process impacts to interconnections, planning, DER equipment, communications and controls, and settlement activities. So really, discussions like this and others with our policymakers in this process will be most helpful in supporting initiatives like renewables and market participation in the future. So I just wanted to provide a summary on that, and hopefully it gives you some background as to where we're going in the future. And we're excited about our emerging technologies roadmap, and we're excited about how that will, enable new DER on the system and support our customers. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Ms. Summerday, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Have you, are there any pending projects either in Potomac Edison in Maryland, or have you seen them corporate-wide for industrial scale battery energy storage systems, requesting private development and interconnection to either transmission or distribution? Have you seen it in Maryland? Have you seen it elsewhere? What's your experience there?
So to date, we have not seen it in the Potomac Edison service territory, but I can tell you that in our other jurisdictions, there is interest in in energy storage projects by a third party that would interconnect, if they're large enough, really, at the transmission level. So I think that third parties, being that we operate, most of our jurisdictions are in a restructured competitive environment. The third parties do have that opportunity to invest in these types of programs. And then they would need to, as my colleague described in SMECO, to go through the interconnection process. If it's at a transmission level, then they would go through the PJM queue. If it's at a distribution level, then we also have distribution level interconnection processes in place, and that we would go through, an interconnection agreement evaluation, much like Steve described, and that we would evaluate the opportunity based on normal system configurations and worst case scenario.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Thank you.
So Matt, if you could move us to the next slide. Thanks. All right. with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I'm going to take this last substantive slide, and this is more aimed at integrating the experience that we at Potomac Edison have had in doing distribution planning up to the present with the vision that has been articulated so far for this public conference, and specifically to kind of enumerate some of the issues that directly or indirectly were touched upon during the two prior presentations by the Exelon company that the commission may want to consider having on its list of issues to discuss when we get past the education stage to the actual work group and process development stage. So these are four types of issues, and they have a regulatory overlay, which is why I'm the presenter on this slide. The first is balancing new processes, enhanced input, and enhanced sharing of information against costs in terms of money and costs in terms of time, and that sort of speaks for itself. The more time we spend doing disclosure, discovery, discussion, the more time a project is going to take, and potentially the more it will cost. And to the extent that there are benefits, that's time and money well spent, but it's going to be a balancing process. And so we just wanted that to be explicitly a consideration for the commission to consider as we went forward. The second topic is those of us who have been building these things like substations for years, or in Steve's case, decades, know that quite apart from any commission process that exists or is going to be created, there is a local / county interest that takes the form of permitting and zoning, and there are processes, sometimes very long, and involved processes that are involved in, for example, getting approval to build a substation. And so one of the questions that will need to be, or that respectfully we recommend be considered by this proceeding as we go forward, is how do we interlace any new process that the commission develops with the existing processes that are led and directed by the county and local jurisdictions. Then the third topic, the commission has made very clear that they intend to preserve the current responsibility of the electric distribution companies for maintaining the operation and reliability of the system. And properly so, when we embrace that responsibility, that is what we do. On the other hand, if there is a process that emphasizes stakeholder input, it seems almost inevitable that there will be dissatisfied stakeholders from some decisions that would be made by the utilities in some circumstances. How does that play out? And related to that is, are there going to be different kinds of stakeholders, both with respect to input and with respect to the information they receive? This sort of is the transition from the third point to the fourth point. the commission has put a lot of emphasis on transparency, sharing lots more information, sharing it earlier, and in theory, this is something that, again, we agree with and we can see practical benefits to. But as the discussions with the Exelon companies help to illuminate, there are different types and gradations of information. There is confidential electric infrastructure information that enjoys a high level of federal law protection. There is confidential business information, not just of the utility, but of our customers. And then there are other forms of sensitive information. And figuring out who can get what types of information when is in itself potentially going to be a complex process. And we wanted the commission to be aware that we see that as something that will need to be sorted out depending on what direction this proceeding goes in. So, none of this is particularly good or happy news, but we felt that it was better to put these issues on the table early on in the process. And so, and I drew the short straw, so we have done that. And that's with that, that's the end of our substantive presentation, and we are ready to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Trout. I don't think you ended on a sort of an unhappy or negative note. I think these are practical considerations that the work group will have to consider as we open up the distribution system planning process to stakeholders. So as we heard from Exelon a few weeks ago, their utilities, and as we just heard from you, the work group will have to figure out reasonable expectations to allow access without providing confidential or otherwise non-public data that could threaten the integrity of the grid. To the extent there are disputes, we will resolve them at some point down the road. But as I understand it, the work group leaders have rolled up their sleeves, and they're all cooperating at this early stage, and that's a good sign. I thought that was another comprehensive presentation, so thank you to Michelle and to Steve for walking us through, particularly the details with respect to Order 2222. I would argue that FERC did usurp some state jurisdiction, but I think there will be net positive effects to the extent that we can get more distributed energy resources onto our grid. Let me inquire, see if my colleagues have some questions. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Trout, I wanted to explore my understanding of the issue you raised with regard to transparency. It wasn't just the commission that raised the issue, but it was replete throughout the 2-year NARUC-NASIO distribution system planning task force that I participated in. It was everywhere. It was from multiple states. It was across the industry. And so I wanted to ask and I think it's certainly held here, and I think you raised valid points with regard to the sensitivity of some of this information. And so I'm not pushing back on that notion because I think that you're right. But I wanted to see if Potomac Edison acknowledges that an asymmetry of information exists between stakeholders, including the commission and the utility with regard to distribution system planning information.
Yes.
Good. That's the right answer.
I'm usually good at tests, Commissioner.
All right. Very good. Because, that's going to be a crucial piece of this discussion going forward. Not only where do we draw the line, but the willingness of our utilities to take what was a closely held process forever and start to open it up a little bit. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and we're going to have some growing pains with it. But the first step, I think, is the utilities acknowledging that it has to occur.
Commissioner, as long as the commission is going to help us all build a process, first of all, the nuances, the information access and the participation in an appropriate way, and secondly, recognizes that more transparency of the more transparency is likely to add both time and cost. Then I think we're all going to be working in the same direction.
I appreciate that. And it's not just for distribution system planning in the traditional sense or the historical sense, but also for alternative forms of rate making, multi-year rate plans.
Yep.
And we're experiencing that going, right now in real time, the difficulties with a lack of, with the problem of asymmetry of information and doing these forecasts and looking forward. So it's something that we're going to grapple with, and I appreciate the utilities' willingness to work together with us as we go down this path.
Good. We're on board.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Well, I want to thank both of our two large Southern Maryland and Western Maryland utilities to present with us today. It completes the waterfront in terms of our big state utilities and what they currently do to effectuate the distribution system planning process. We will have yet another DSP educational background session to be scheduled in the near future. That would be session number 4. In the meantime, I understand that the work group will be available and can use this room for additional discussions for the next period of time, 45 minutes or so. So I will thank the presenters, thank my colleagues, and turn it over to our host advisor, Miss Molly Knoll, for additional instructions as we prepare to cut the YouTube feed. Miss Knoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those who are staying, I'm going to put up a slide. We're going to go with 5 minutes. So we'll be back at 11:52 and we'll start the stakeholder questions.
Miss Knoll, thank you to everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.